The golden sunlight of dawn spilled across Dahlia Sutton's window, illuminating the treasure that had brought her nothing but misery, her hair. Long, thick, and shimmering with a color that folks said rivaled the purest gold in any prospector's pan. In 1876 Colorado, gold could make a person rich or get them killed, and Dahlia had learned that her hair could do both. Dahlia stood before the cracked mirror in her modest bedroom, running a brush through the luminous strands that fell past her waist. She'd spent 23 years on this earth, and for as long as she could remember, people had remarked upon her hair. Like spun gold, they'd say, or worth a fortune in any bank from here to San Francisco. She never thought anyone would take those words literally until her stepfather decided to make them so. Dahlia! The gruff voice of Emmett Sutton echoed up the narrow staircase of their homestead. Get yourself down here, we got company. She set down her brush with trembling fingers. Company at this hour could only mean one thing: another prospective buyer. Her mother had died last winter, leaving Dahlia alone with the man who'd married into their family for the modest plot of land they owned. When the land failed to yield crops or minerals, Emmett had turned his attention to the only other asset in his possession, his stepdaughter's remarkable hair. "Coming," she called, quickly braiding her hair and tucking it beneath a simple bonnet. She'd learned to hide it whenever strangers came calling. The main room of their homestead was dimly lit, but Dahlia could make out three figures. Emmett, with his perpetually whiskey-flushed face. A portly man in a silk waistcoat whose watch chain glinted in the firelight, and a third man, standing slightly apart, his face shadowed beneath the brim of a dusty cowboy hat. "There she is," Emmett said, gesturing broadly toward Dahlia. "Show the gentleman what we discussed." Dahlia remained frozen in the doorway. "I don't know what you mean." Emmett's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Your hair, girl. Mr. Beauregard here has come all the way from Denver to see it." "I've heard tales," the portly man said, eyeing her like she was a prize mare at auction. "They say it's the color of the purest nugget ever pulled from the earth. I run a traveling show of curiosities, Miss Sutton. People would pay handsomely to see such a wonder." "I'm not a curiosity," Dahlia said, her voice barely above a whisper. The third man shifted his weight, and for the first time, Dahlia caught a glimpse of his face, lean and weathered by sun and wind, with eyes the color of a summer storm. Unlike Beauregard, he wasn't looking at her hair. He was looking at her face, her eyes, and there was something in his gaze that made her heart stutter. "Mr. Beauregard has made a generous offer," Emmett said, pulling her attention back. $50 for you to join his show. You'll get room and board, and all you have to do is let folks admire what God gave you." "And if I refuse?" "You won't," Emmett said flatly. "I've already accepted his money." Dahlia's blood ran cold. "You can't sell me. I'm not property." "I ain't selling you," Emmett retorted. "Just your services. And as your legal guardian." "I'm 23," Dahlia interrupted. "I'm no one's ward." The cowboy spoke for the first time, his voice low and rough like stones tumbling in a creek bed. "The lady has a point, Sutton." Emmett glared at him. "No one asked you, Walker. You're just the hired gun. Your job is to escort her to Denver, not speak on her behalf." So that's what he was muscle to ensure she cooperated. Dahlia's hopes sank further. "I need a moment," she said, backing toward the door. To gather my things." Beauregard nodded magnanimously. "Of course, my dear, but do make haste. We should be on the road within the hour." Dahlia fled up the narrow stairs, her mind racing. There was nowhere to run. Their homestead was miles from the nearest neighbor. No one would come to her aid, and even if they did, what could they do against men with guns and the money to back their claims? She sank onto her bed, unfastening her bonnet with trembling fingers. Her golden hair tumbled free, catching the light from the window. All her life, People had coveted what grew from her head, as if it somehow made her less human and more commodity. A soft knock at her door made her jump. "Miss Sutton?" It was the cowboy, Walker. "May I have a word?" Dahlia hastily tucked her hair back under her bonnet. "What do you want?" The door creaked open, and he stepped just inside the threshold, keeping a respectful distance. Up close, she could see he was younger than she'd first thought, perhaps late 20s. His eyes were indeed the color of storm clouds, set in a face tanned by years under the sun. "Zachary Walker," he introduced himself. "I wanted to say, this isn't right, what they're doing. Yet you're part of it." He had the grace to look ashamed. "I was hired to escort a willing performer to Denver. I didn't know that I was being sold." The bitterness in her voice could have curdled milk. "I won't force you to go anywhere," Zachary said quietly. "But I should warn you, Beauregard isn't a man to cross. And from what I've seen of your stepfather, he'll find another buyer if this deal falls through." Dahlia's shoulders slumped. "So I'm trapped either way." "Not necessarily." Zachary glanced over his shoulder, then lowered his voice. "There's a town about 20 miles west of here, Silverdale. I know folks there who might help." Hope flickered in her chest, but suspicion quickly doused it. "Why would you help me? You don't even know me." Something passed across his face. Determination, perhaps, or a kind of quiet fury. "Because my sister had golden hair too. Not like yours, but pretty enough to catch the wrong man's eye. No one helped her." He paused. "I can get you to Silverdale, but you'd have to trust me." Dahlia studied him. In a world that had given her few reasons to trust, she found herself wanting to believe this stranger. "How would we get away?" "I'll tell them I'm taking you to gather supplies in town. Once we're clear, we'll head for Silverdale instead." It was a desperate plan, but desperation was all she had. "All right, Mr. Walker. I'll trust you because I have no other choice." Zachary nodded solemnly. "Pack only what you need. And Miss Sutton? Best keep that bonnet on tight." After he left, Dahlia moved quickly, stuffing a few essentials into a small satchel. A change of clothes, her mother's silver hairbrush, the locket containing a strand of her mother's brown hair so different from Dahlia's own. When she descended the stairs, Zachary was speaking to Beauregard in low tones. "Needs some personal items from town. Women's things. I'll take her and be back before sundown." Beauregard frowned. "Is that necessary?" "We have supplies in the wagon." "It'll make for an easier journey if she's comfortable," Zachary insisted. "Less trouble for you in the long run." After a moment's consideration, Beauregard nodded. "Very well. But if she runs—" "She won't," Zachary said with confidence that Dahlia didn't feel. "Will you, Miss Sutton?" Dahlia lowered her eyes submissively. "No, sir." Emmett watched the exchange with narrowed eyes. "I'll come along." "That won't be necessary," Zachary said smoothly. "I'm quite capable of handling one young woman." He tapped the revolver at his hip meaningfully. Beauregard laughed a wheezing, unpleasant sound. "He's right, Sutton. Walker's reputation precedes him. They call him Sure Shot for a reason." Emmett didn't look convinced, but the promise of Beauregard's money and perhaps the threat of Zachary's gun kept him from arguing further. Outside, Zachary helped Dahlia onto his horse, a sturdy bay gelding. He mounted behind her, keeping a respectful distance as he reached around her for the reins. "Hold on," he murmured, and they set off at a trot down the dusty road that led away from the only home Dahlia had ever known. They rode in silence until the homestead disappeared behind a rise. Then Zachary urged the horse into a gallop, veering off the main road onto a narrow trail that wound through a stand of ponderosa pines. "They'll figure it out soon enough," he called over the drumming of hooves. "But I know these trails better than most. We should reach Silverdale by nightfall." Dahlia clung to the saddle horn, the rhythm of the horse beneath her both terrifying and exhilarating. She'd never been farther from home than the nearby trading post. Now she was racing toward an unknown future with a man she'd just met, a man called Sure Shot. "Why are you really helping me?" she called back. His answer was nearly lost in the wind. "Because some things are worth more than gold." As the sun climbed higher, they slowed to rest the horse. Zachary helped Dahlia dismount beside a small creek, where they refilled their canteens and allowed the gelding to drink. "We should keep moving," he said, scanning the horizon. "They'll have figured out we're not coming back by now." "Where will we go in Silverdale?" Dahlia asked, splashing water on her flushed face. "Do you really know people who can help?" Zachary nodded. "There's a woman there, Martha Kingsley. She runs a boarding house for working women. She helped my sister once, and she's got no love for men who treat women like property." "And after that?" "Beauregard won't simply give up." "One step at a time," he said, offering a hand to help her up. "First, we get you to safety." As Dahlia took his hand, her bonnet slipped, releasing a cascade of golden hair that caught the midday sun like a waterfall of molten metal. Zachary's eyes widened, and for a moment, he seemed unable to speak. Dahlia quickly tucked her hair back, her cheeks burning with embarrassment. "I'm sorry, I know it's unusual." "No," Zachary said softly. "Don't apologize. It's just, I've never seen anything like it." "That's the problem," she said bitterly. "Neither has anyone else." They continued their journey, the terrain growing more rugged as they climbed into the foothills. Zachary proved to be as skilled a guide as he'd claimed, navigating narrow passages and hidden trails that kept them concealed from the main roads. By late afternoon, dark clouds had gathered on the horizon, bringing with them the promise of a storm. The temperature dropped, and Dahlia shivered against Zachary's chest. "There's a line shack up ahead," he said, pointing to a barely visible structure nestled among the pines. "We'll stop there until the storm passes." The shack was little more than a hunter's shelter, a single room with a small hearth, a rickety table, and a narrow cot. But it was sturdy and dry, and as the first fat raindrops began to fall, Dahlia was grateful for its shelter. Zachary busied himself starting a fire while Dahlia stood awkwardly in the center of the room, unsure of her place in this strange new situation. "You should sit," he said, nodding toward the cot. "Rest while you can. Tomorrow will be another long day." Dahlia perched on the edge of the cot, watching as he coaxed flames from the kindling. "Were you really hired to be Mr. Beauregard's guard?" Zachary nodded, his face grim in the growing firelight. "I work as a scout and guide mostly, but sometimes as hired protection. Jobs have been scarce since the mines started closing." "And you're willing to give up payment to help me?" He stoked the fire before answering. "Some debts can't be paid in dollars." The storm rolled in with fury, rain lashing against the walls of the shack and thunder cracking overhead. Zachary produced jerky and hardtack from his saddlebags, apologizing for the meager offerings. "I've had worse," Dahlia said, accepting a strip of jerky. In truth, she'd rarely had better. Emmett kept tight control of their provisions, often leaving Dahlia to subsist on whatever she could grow in their small garden. As they ate, Zachary kept his eyes respectfully averted from her hair, which she'd freed from the confines of her bonnet. It was a small courtesy, but one that touched her deeply. "You said your sister had golden hair," Dahlia ventured. "What happened to her?" Zachary's jaw tightened. "She was 16 when a man passing through our town took a fancy to her. Offered our father money for her hand." He paused. "My father refused, but the man wouldn't take no for an answer. He took her anyway." "I'm sorry," Dahlia whispered. "I tracked them for 3 weeks," Zachary continued, his voice hollow. "Found them in a mining camp near the Montana border. She was different by then, broken in ways I couldn't fix." "Did you kill him?" Dahlia asked, surprising herself with the directness of the question. Zachary met her eyes. Yes. The simple admission hung in the air between them, neither condemnation nor boast, just fact. What happened to your sister? She lives in San Francisco now, married a good man, has 2 children. A ghost of a smile crossed his face. She named her son after me. Outside, the storm raged on, but within the shack, a different kind of tension built, one made of shared confidences and growing trust. You should sleep, Zachary said eventually, moving to spread his bedroll by the hearth. I'll keep watch. You need rest too, Dahlia pointed out. I'll manage. I've gone longer without sleep. Dahlia wanted to argue but found she lacked the energy. The day's events had drained her completely. She lay down on the cot, listening to the rain and the occasional crack of thunder. Mr. Walker? She said softly. Zachary, he corrected. Or Zach, if you prefer. Zachary, she repeated, testing the name on her tongue. Thank you. For helping me. In the firelight, she saw him nod. Get some sleep, Miss Sutton. Dahlia, she murmured, already drifting. My name is Dahlia. Zachary smiled. I know. Dawn broke clear and crisp after the storm, painting the mountains in shades of purple and gold. Dahlia awoke to find Zachary already outside, saddling his horse. He'd let her sleep while he kept vigil through the night. We should reach Silverdale by midday, he said as they set out. Martha will help you get settled. Find work if you want it. And you? Dahlia asked. What will you do? Zachary was quiet for a moment. Make sure Beauregard and your stepfather understand you're not for sale. They won't give up easily. Neither will I. The journey to Silverdale was less hurried than their escape had been, but Zachary remained vigilant, frequently checking their back trail for signs of pursuit. Dahlia found herself studying him when he wasn't looking, the way he sat easy in the saddle, the careful way he scanned their surroundings, the gentle hands that guided his horse with minimal pressure. By the time the small mining town of Silverdale came into view, a collection of wooden buildings nestled in a valley between 2 mountains, Dahlia had formed an impression of Zachary Walker that went beyond hired gun. He was a man of quiet strength, of carefully controlled emotions, of unexpected kindness. Keep your bonnet on, he advised as they approached the town. Better not to draw attention until we've reached Martha's. Silverdale was livelier than Dahlia had expected, with miners and merchants crowding the main street. A few curious glances came their way. A new face was always noteworthy in such a small community, but no one paid them undue attention as Zachary guided his horse to a 2-story building with a neatly painted sign, Kingsley Boarding House. A tall woman with iron-gray hair swept back in a severe bun met them at the door. Her eyes narrowed at the sight of Zachary. Walker, she said, neither friendly nor hostile. Been a while. Martha, he replied with a respectful nod. I've brought someone who needs help. Martha's gaze shifted to Dahlia, and something in her stern expression softened. Come inside, both of you. This isn't a conversation for the street. The boarding house was clean and modestly furnished, with a sitting room that smelled of beeswax and coffee. Martha gestured for them to sit, then folded her arms across her chest. Start talking, Walker. Zachary explained Dahlia's situation concisely, omitting only the part about his killing the man who'd taken his sister. When he finished, Martha turned to Dahlia. May I see? Dahlia hesitated, then removed her bonnet. In the light streaming through the windows, her hair gleamed like a treasury of gold coins. Martha let out a low whistle. Well, I can see why they want to put you on display. She shook her head. Men. Always thinking they can own what isn't theirs to possess. Can you help her? Zachary asked. I can offer room and board, Martha said. And there's work to be had in town if you're willing. The assayer's office needs a clerk, and you look like you can read and write. I can, Dahlia confirmed. My mother taught me. Good. Martha nodded approvingly. But your stepfather and this showman, they'll come looking. Hair like that isn't easily forgotten. I could cut it, Dahlia suggested, though the thought sent a pang through her heart. Her hair had been her mother's pride, the one beautiful thing in a life of hardship. Let's not be hasty, Martha said. There are other ways to disguise it. Dye, for one. I'll deal with Beauregard and Sutton, Zachary said firmly. Martha gave him a sharp look. The way you dealt with that man in Montana? Zachary's face hardened. If necessary. No, Dahlia said, surprising them both. I won't have more violence because of me. They sold you, Zachary reminded her. And I'm free now, she countered. I want to stay that way, but not at the cost of more bloodshed. Martha studied her with newfound respect. There's courage in you, girl. Good. You'll need it. She turned to Zachary. You'll stay for dinner, then be on your way. The less connection between you two, the safer she'll be. It was a sensible plan, but Dahlia felt an unexpected reluctance to part from the man who'd risked so much to help her. In the space of a day, Zachary Walker had become her protector, her confidant, perhaps even her friend. Martha showed Dahlia to a small but clean room on the second floor, providing a basin of water and a simple dress to replace her travel-worn clothes. Dinner's at 6, she said. Come down when you're ready. Left alone, Dahlia sank onto the narrow bed, exhaustion finally catching up with her. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to cry for her mother, for the home she'd lost, for the uncertain future ahead. When she finally descended to the dining room, she found Martha and Zachary in deep conversation, their voices too low to hear. They fell silent as she entered, but the tension in the room was palpable. Is everything all right? She asked. Just discussing precautions, Martha said smoothly. Sit. Eat. You need your strength. The meal was simple but hearty venison stew, cornbread and apple preserves. Dahlia ate ravenously, realizing she hadn't had a proper meal in days. I've arranged for you to meet with Mr. Hayes at the assayer's office tomorrow morning, Martha informed her. In the meantime, we'll need to do something about your hair. What do you suggest? Dahlia asked. Coffee, Martha said. Strong brewed, it'll darken the gold enough to make you less noticeable. Not permanently, but it'll help until we can find a more lasting solution. After dinner, Martha set to work, brewing a pot of coffee so strong it made Dahlia's eyes water. The application was messy and time-consuming, but by the end, Dahlia's hair had transformed from brilliant gold to a subdued honey brown. It'll wash out eventually, Martha warned, but it should last a few weeks if you're careful. Zachary, who had been preparing to leave, paused at the sight of her. Something flickered in his eyes, regret perhaps, or simple acknowledgement of the change. It suits you, he said quietly, though the gold was beautiful. Beauty can be dangerous, Dahlia replied. Yes, he agreed. It can. Martha excused herself to prepare linens for Dahlia's bed, leaving them alone in the sitting room. Will I see you again? Dahlia asked, hating the vulnerability in her voice but unable to suppress it. Zachary hesitated. It's safer if I keep my distance, at least until we're sure Beauregard has given up. And if he doesn't, then I'll be close enough to help. He stepped forward, taking her hand in his. Dahlia, I want you to know. A pounding at the front door cut him off. Martha rushed into the room, her face taut with alarm. Riders coming into town, she hissed. A fancy fellow in a silk waistcoat and several rough-looking men. One of them matches your description of Sutton. Zachary cursed under his breath. They must have tracked us. Out the back, Martha ordered. Both of you. I have a wagon ready. I always keep one prepared, just in case. She pressed a small purse into Dahlia's hands. Enough to get you started somewhere new. I can't take your money, Dahlia protested. You can and you will, Martha said firmly. Consider it an investment in your future. Now go. The pounding at the door grew more insistent. Zachary took Dahlia's arm, guiding her through the kitchen and out the back door to where a small wagon stood waiting, hitched to a sturdy mule. "I'll drive," he said, helping her up. "Stay low and keep your head covered." They set off down the alley behind the boarding house just as they heard the front door splinter open. Zachary kept the mule at a walk, not wanting the sound of hooves to betray their escape. "Where will we go?" Dahlia whispered. "I know a place," Zachary said. "A cabin in the high country. It belongs to a friend who's working a claim in California. No one will look for you there." As they reached the edge of town, a shout went up behind them. Zachary flicked the reins, urging the mule into a trot. "They've spotted us," he said grimly. "Hold on." The wagon rattled over the rough road, every bump threatening to throw them off. Dahlia clung to the seat, her heart pounding in her ears. Behind them, hoofbeats signaled pursuit. "There's a rifle under the seat," Zachary told her, not taking his eyes off the road. "If it comes to it." "I've never fired a gun in my life," Dahlia said. "Let's hope you don't have to start now." The road narrowed as it wound into the foothills, making it difficult for riders to overtake them. But the mule was no match for horses in full gallop, and soon their pursuers were close enough that Dahlia could hear Emmett Sutton's voice. "Stop the wagon. Walker! You're a dead man!" Zachary ignored the threat, steering the mule onto a side trail barely wide enough for the wagon's wheels. Branches whipped at them as they plunged into the forest, the path growing steeper with every yard. "They can't follow with horses," Zachary explained. "Not on this trail." Sure enough, the sounds of pursuit faded as they climbed higher into the mountains, but their relief was short. The trail ahead had been washed out by the previous night's storm, leaving a gap too wide for the wagon to cross. "We'll have to go on foot," Zachary said, reining the mule to a stop. "The cabin's about 3 miles from here." They gathered what supplies they could carry: food, blankets, and the rifle Zachary insisted on bringing despite Dahlia's reluctance. He unhitched the mule, slapping its rump to send it back down the trail. "It'll find its way to someone who can use it," he said, "and it'll confuse our trail." The hike was grueling, especially for Dahlia, who'd never ventured this far into the mountains. Zachary set a brisk pace, frequently stopping to listen for signs of pursuit. By the time the cabin came into view, a sturdy log structure nestled in a clearing beside a small lake the sun was setting, painting the mountains in fiery hues of red and gold. "We should be safe here," Zachary said, unlocking the cabin door. "At least for a while." The interior was rustic but comfortable, with a stone fireplace, a table and chairs, a small kitchen area, and a curtained-off sleeping alcove. Zachary quickly built a fire while Dahlia explored their temporary refuge. "Your friend lives well for a prospector," she observed, noting the quality of the furnishings. "Jim Harker struck it rich in '68, Zachary explained. "He could live in a mansion if he wanted, but he prefers the mountains. Says they keep a man honest." As night fell, they shared a simple meal of beans and jerky. Dahlia found herself stealing glances at Zachary in the firelight, noting the way the shadows played across his features, softening the hard lines of his face. "What will happen now?" she asked, setting aside her empty plate. Zachary leaned back in his chair, considering. "We'll stay here until it's safe. Martha will send word when Beauregard and Sutton leave Silverdale." "And if they don't leave?" "Everyone leaves eventually," he said with quiet certainty. "Especially men like them. They'll find easier prey." The thought sent a chill through Dahlia. "Other women with golden hair?" "Maybe." Zachary's eyes met hers. "But they'll never find one like you." The simple statement hung in the air between them, loaded with meaning neither was quite ready to acknowledge. "You should take the bed," Zachary said, breaking the moment. "I'll sleep by the fire." "Thank you." Dahlia said softly. Though whether she was thanking him for the bed or for everything else, she wasn't entirely sure. As she lay in the darkness of the sleeping alcove, listening to Zachary move quietly around the cabin, securing doors and windows, Dahlia felt something she hadn't experienced in years. Safety. Not just physical safety, but a deeper sense of security that came from knowing someone cared what happened to her. The days at the cabin settled into a comfortable rhythm. Zachary taught Dahlia to fish in the lake and to identify edible plants in the forest. She showed him how to make bread with the limited supplies they had, a skill her mother had passed down. They talked about their childhoods, their dreams, the books they'd read. Dahlia learned that Zachary had worked as a scout for the army before turning to freelance work, that he could speak 3 Indian languages, that he'd once traveled as far east as Chicago but found it too crowded for his liking. In turn, she told him about growing up with a mother who loved stories, who taught her to read by lamplight after long days of work, who believed education was the one thing no one could take from you. She sounds like a remarkable woman, Zachary said one evening as they sat by the fire. She was, Dahlia agreed, twisting a strand of her hair now fading from coffee brown back to its natural gold. She used to say my hair was a blessing and a curse. A blessing because it was beautiful, a curse because beauty attracts those who want to possess it. She was right, Zachary said. But it doesn't have to be a curse. Not if you control how it's seen. A week passed, then 2. No word came from Martha, but neither did any signs of pursuit. The isolation of the cabin, which had initially felt like imprisonment, gradually transformed into a kind of freedom. Here, in this remote corner of the mountains, Dahlia wasn't defined by her unusual hair or by the men who sought to profit from it. She was simply herself, a woman discovering her own strength. And then there was Zachary. Each day, each conversation, each shared meal drew them closer. Dahlia found herself noticing things about him, the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, the gentleness of his hands despite their roughness, the quiet respect with which he treated her. One afternoon, as they fished side by side on the lakeshore, Zachary suddenly stiffened, setting down his pole. "Someone's coming," he said, his voice low. "Get back to the cabin." Dahlia's heart raced as she hurried up the path, Zachary close behind her. Inside, he retrieved the rifle, checking that it was loaded. "Stay away from the windows," he instructed. "If something happens to me, don't," Dahlia interrupted. "Nothing's going to happen to you." A knock at the door silenced them both. Zachary motioned for Dahlia to move behind him as he approached the door, rifle ready. "Who's there?" he called. "It's Martha Kingsley," came the reply. "I'm alone." Zachary opened the door cautiously, relaxing only when he confirmed Martha was indeed by herself. She entered, removing her hat and surveying the cabin with an appraising eye. "Cozy," she remarked. "You two look well." "What news?" Zachary asked, setting the rifle aside. Martha's expression grew serious. "Beauregard's gone. Took his show to Denver after tearing apart half of Silverdale looking for you." She turned to Dahlia. "Your stepfather stayed longer, but he ran out of money for whiskey and moved on. Last I heard, he was headed for Wyoming." Relief washed over Dahlia. "So it's safe to go back?" "To Silverdale, yes," Martha confirmed. "Mr. Hayes is still holding that position at the assayer's office if you want it." Dahlia glanced at Zachary, whose face had become unreadable. "And what about elsewhere? Is it safe to travel?" "Beauregard's the type to hold a grudge," Martha warned. "I wouldn't go to Denver or any big town where his show might pass through. But elsewhere? The territory's vast, and you're just one woman. With your hair dyed properly, you could disappear anywhere you choose." The possibility of freedom, real freedom to go where she pleased, to build a life on her own terms, was dizzying. Yet as Dahlia looked at Zachary, she felt a tug of something else, something that made the thought of disappearing anywhere less appealing. "I'll let you two discuss your plans," Martha said, astute enough to recognize the undercurrents. "I've brought supplies, including proper hair dye. They're in my wagon." After Martha had gone to unload the supplies, Dahlia turned to Zachary. "What will you do now?" He looked away. "Go back to work, I suppose. There's always demand for guides." "And will you go far?" Zachary met her eyes then, and the intensity in his gaze made her breath catch. "That depends." "On what?" "On where you'll be." The simple statement hung between them, charged with everything unsaid during their weeks together. "I don't know where I'll be," Dahlia admitted. "I've never had the freedom to choose before." Zachary took a step toward her. "You have it now." "Yes," she whispered. "I do." Another step. "Dahlia, He hesitated. "I've grown to care for you. More than I should, perhaps." "Why shouldn't you?" she challenged. "Because I promised to keep you safe, not complicate your life." Dahlia closed the remaining distance between them. "What if I want complications?" For a moment they stood so close that Dahlia could feel the warmth radiating from him, could see the conflict in his storm-gray eyes. Then, with a gentleness that belied his strength, Zachary cupped her face in his hands. "Your hair," he said softly. "It shines for me now. Not for Beauregard. Not for anyone who would put a price on it. Just for me, if you'll allow it." "Yes," Dahlia breathed, and then his lips were on hers, gentle at first, then with growing urgency. She wound her arms around his neck, pressing closer as years of loneliness and fear melted away in the heat of his embrace. When they finally broke apart, both breathing heavily, Dahlia rested her forehead against his chest, listening to the rapid beat of his heart. "What happens now?" she asked. Zachary's arms tightened around her. "Whatever you want. Wherever you want to go, I'll go with you if you'll have me." "I will," she said without hesitation. "But where should we go?" "I know a place," Zachary said. "A small town near the Wyoming border. Good people, good land. Far from here and farther still from Denver." "A fresh start," Dahlia murmured. "For both of us." Martha, returning with an armload of supplies, found them still embracing. She cleared her throat, but her eyes were kind. "Well," she said, "I see you've made at least one decision." Dahlia blushed but didn't move from Zachary's arms. "We're going north," she told Martha. "Together." Martha nodded approvingly. "Good. But first," she held up a packet. "We need to do something about that hair. It's starting to shine again." 2 days later, Dahlia stood beside Zachary on a bluff overlooking the valley that led north. Her hair, now a rich chestnut brown thanks to Martha's dye, was braided and pinned beneath a practical hat. They had purchased a wagon and supplies in Silverdale, where Dahlia had been introduced as Mrs. Walker, a fiction that would soon be truth. "Ready?" Zachary asked, taking her hand. Dahlia looked back at the mountains where they had found each other, then forward to the open country ahead. "Yes," she said. "I'm ready." The journey north was long but uneventful. They traveled by day and camped by night, sometimes joining other travelers for safety, other times enjoying the solitude of remote campsites. Zachary taught Dahlia to shoot not the rifle, which proved too unwieldy for her, but a small revolver that fit neatly in her hand. "Not that you'll need it," he assured her, "but knowing you can protect yourself brings peace of mind." As they crossed into Wyoming territory, the landscape changed, becoming more rugged and open. And with each mile, the specter of Beauregard and Emmett Sutton receded further, until they were little more than bad memories. Finally, after nearly 3 weeks of travel, they crested a hill and saw the town of Pine Creek spread before them, a collection of wooden buildings nestled in a valley beside a swift-running stream. "It's beautiful," Dahlia said, shielding her eyes against the setting sun. "It's home," Zachary replied, "if you want it to be." They were married the next day by the town's preacher, a no-nonsense man who asked few questions about their past. Martha's Mrs. Walker fiction became reality, and with it came a new sense of permanence, of belonging. With the money Martha had given them, supplemented by Zachary's savings, they purchased a small ranch on the outskirts of town. The house needed work, and the land had been neglected. But to Dahlia, it was paradise, a place that was truly hers, where her value wasn't measured by the gold in her hair, but by the strength of her character. Zachary found work as a hunting guide for Eastern sportsmen who came west seeking trophies and adventure. The work took him away sometimes, but he always returned, often with stories that made Dahlia laugh or gasp or both. For her part, Dahlia planted a garden larger than any she'd managed at her stepfather's homestead. She joined the local women's auxiliary, taught reading to children whose families couldn't afford school, and gradually let the dye in her hair fade away. "Aren't you worried?" Zachary asked one evening as he watched her brush out the golden strands. "About being recognized?" Dahlia shook her head. "Not anymore. Beauregard wanted a curiosity, a spectacle. Here, I'm just a woman with unusually bright hair. Besides," she smiled at him through the mirror, "you said it yourself. My hair shines for you now, not for them." Zachary moved behind her, placing his hands on her shoulders. "It does," he agreed, bending to kiss the top of her head. "And it's more beautiful for it." As the seasons changed, so did their lives. Zachary took fewer guiding jobs, focusing instead on building up their ranch. Dahlia discovered she had a talent for business, keeping meticulous records and suggesting investments that gradually increased their modest holdings. Word reached them occasionally of Beauregard's traveling show, but it never came close to Pine Creek. Emmett Sutton's name appeared once in a newspaper account of a bar fight in Cheyenne that left 2 men dead, him being one of them. "Are you all right?" Zachary asked when he found Dahlia reading the article. "Yes," she said, and meant it. He was never really family. In the spring of their second year in Pine Creek, Dahlia gave birth to a daughter, a tiny, perfect being with a dusting of golden hair that matched her mother's. They named her Aurora, for the dawn that had illuminated Dahlia's hair on the morning she and Zachary met. "She's beautiful," Zachary whispered, cradling his daughter with a tenderness that made Dahlia's heart swell. "Just like her mother." "Let's hope her hair brings her more joy than trouble," Dahlia said. Zachary looked up, his eyes serious. "It will, because we'll teach her that her worth isn't in her appearance, but in her heart. Just like your mother taught you." As Aurora grew, so did their family. A son followed 2 years later, dark-haired like his father but with Dahlia's green eyes. They named him James, after Zachary's friend who had unknowingly provided the sanctuary where their love had blossomed. Life wasn't always easy. Droughts came, as did harsh winters that tested their resources and resolve. But through it all, Dahlia and Zachary faced each challenge together, drawing strength from the bond that had formed during those precious weeks in the mountain cabin. 10 years after they arrived in Pine Creek, the town had grown enough to warrant a proper celebration for its founding. A festival was planned, with music, dancing, and various competitions to showcase local talents. "You should enter the baking contest," Zachary suggested as they discussed the upcoming festivities. "Your apple pie is the best in 3 counties." Dahlia laughed. "Maybe, but only if you enter the shooting competition." "Those are for young men with something to prove," he protested. "I'm a respectable rancher now." "You're still the best shot I've ever seen," she countered. "And the children would love to see their father win." In the end, they both entered their respective contests. Zachary won the shooting competition with a display of marksmanship that left even longtime residents impressed. And Dahlia's pie took first prize, earning her a blue ribbon and the grudging respect of women who had initially viewed the golden-haired newcomer with suspicion. As they danced under the stars that night, surrounded by friends and neighbors they'd come to care for, Zachary pulled Dahlia close. "Happy?" he asked. Dahlia looked around at the life they'd built, their children playing nearby, their home visible on the hillside beyond the town, the community that had accepted them without question. "More than I ever thought possible," she answered truthfully. "And you?" Zachary's eyes, still the color of storm clouds, but now more often alight with contentment than troubled by shadows, met hers. "I found a treasure greater than gold," he said simply. "What do you think?" The music swelled around them, and Dahlia rested her head against his shoulder, her golden hair now streaked with a few strands of silver catching the light of the lanterns hanging overhead. "I think," she said softly, "that some treasures can't be bought or sold. They can only be found when you're not looking for them." Zachary's arms tightened around her. "And kept," he added, "when you recognize their true value." As they swayed together under the vast Wyoming sky, Dahlia reflected on the journey that had brought them here, from a desperate escape to a life filled with purpose and love. Her hair still caught the sunlight like spun gold, still drew admiring glances and occasional whispers. But now, those whispers held respect rather than greed, and the admiring glances slid past her to the man at her side, the children at her feet, the life she had chosen. She had been sold for the gold in her hair, but Zachary had seen beyond the surface shine to the woman beneath. And in his eyes, she had found her true worth, not measured in dollars or display cases, but in the quiet moments of their shared life, in the family they had created, in the home they had built together. The gold in her hair would eventually fade to silver, but the love they had found would endure, as precious and lasting as any metal, as valuable as any fortune, as beautiful as any treasure ever sought in the wild, wild West.